My name is James, and I'm 31 years old. Until a few months ago, I was engaged to a woman named Emma, the love of my life, or at least that's what I thought. If I'm being honest, I didn't expect any of this to happen. If you had told me a year ago that I would be standing here, writing this, feeling like my world had shattered and that I was nothing but a broken version of who I used to be, I wouldn't have believed you. But here we are. Growing up, I was always the second choice. My younger brother Ben was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. It wasn't subtle favoritism. It was glaring, loud, and painful. No matter what I did, I was always compared to Ben, always the one being lectured or reprimanded. We were constantly pitted against each other, though I never understood why. My parents would excuse his bad behavior, saying things like, "Ben's just young, he needs more time," or "He's the sensitive one, so you have to be patient with him." Meanwhile, if I made a mistake, no matter how small, I was lectured for hours. My punishments were always more severe, always harsher. No matter how hard I worked to earn their approval, it never felt like enough. This wasn't some petty sibling rivalry. It wasn't just that my brother was favored, it was everything. The way I was treated in comparison to him, the constant feeling of being overlooked, the relentless pressure to be the perfect son, while Ben was allowed to do whatever he wanted. I would study hard, get top grades, and still be met with indifference. Ben would get mediocre results and be showered with praise. I worked jobs from a young age, paying for things like my own clothes and extracurricular activities. Ben, on the other hand, was handed everything: new clothes, gadgets, even trips. It was as though nothing I did could ever match up. When I went off to college, I thought I was finally escaping it. But the favoritism didn't stop. I earned a partial scholarship to a great school, and while my parents barely acknowledged the achievement, Ben dropped out of community college after one semester. They didn't care. Instead, they praised him for having the courage to follow his heart and to not conform to societal expectations. They financed his string of failed business ideas over the next few years, even though he clearly had no passion or drive. Meanwhile, I was the one struggling to make ends meet, trying to make my degree count. And yet, I felt like I was invisible to them. But no matter how hard I tried to distance myself, no matter how many walls I put up, they always found a way to pull me back in. Family holidays became a minefield of subtle jabs and digs. "Oh, you're still at that entry-level job, huh?" my dad would say, while Ben was making vague claims about some new business he was considering starting. "Ben's so entrepreneurial," they would say, as if my career wasn't important enough to even mention. It was suffocating. Still, I did my best to move on. I tried to hold on to some semblance of a relationship with Ben. After all, he was my brother. Even though he ignored me most of the time, or turned every conversation into a competition where he always had to win, I tried. I reached out, invited him to things, but it always felt one-sided. I was the one putting in the effort, and he was just there, half-heartedly participating. And then I met Emma. Emma was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. Smart, beautiful, funny, and compassionate. She made me feel like I was seen, like I mattered. She was different from anyone I had ever met, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly valued. She loved me for who I was, not for what I did. It felt like a miracle to finally have someone who accepted me, especially after everything with my family. I knew Emma was special from the moment we met. We had a lot in common, and our relationship quickly became something meaningful. We moved in together after a year, and things were great. We talked about our future, about kids one day, about the life we wanted to build together. I proposed on our 4th anniversary. Nothing extravagant, just a simple dinner at home. She said yes, and I couldn't have been happier. I finally had everything I had been longing for: a career I was proud of, and a partner who truly loved me. But when we told my family about the engagement, the response was far from what I had hoped. My mom forced a smile and said, "Oh, how nice," in a tone that made it clear she didn't mean it. My dad just grunted and muttered, "Good luck with that," before turning back to the television. Ben, on the other hand, acted as though he was thrilled for us, but there was something off about his smile. It was too sharp, too rehearsed. In hindsight, I should have paid attention to that look, but I dismissed it, telling myself I was just being paranoid. The year leading up to the wedding was stressful. Emma and I were both working long hours, saving up for the wedding and trying to make our new life together. We didn't see each other as much as we used to, but I assumed it was just a phase. Every couple goes through ups and downs, right? But as the months passed, Emma started acting differently. She was more distant, always on her phone, smiling at texts from people she called business friends, staying out late more often, and smelling of wine and cologne when she came home. I didn't think much of it at first, trusting her completely. Why would I ever suspect that the woman I was going to marry could cheat on me? Then one night, everything changed. Emma sat me down, tears in her eyes, and told me she was pregnant. But it wasn't mine. She had been sleeping with my brother, Ben. My world came crashing down. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The woman I had planned to spend my life with had betrayed me in the worst way possible, with the one person I should have trusted most. I was paralyzed with shock, unable to comprehend what she had just told me. When I asked her how long this had been going on, she confessed that it had started during our engagement party. Ben had told her that marrying me was a mistake and that she could do better. He preyed on her insecurities, playing on everything she felt unsure about. And then they had an affair, behind my back, for months. I don't remember what happened next. I remember kicking Emma out of our apartment, unable to look at her anymore. The anger, the heartbreak, the sense of betrayal, it was too much. I didn't even want to hear her apologies. I just wanted her gone, but I couldn't stop thinking about Ben. How could he do this to me? How could he betray me like this? And how could my family have let it happen? The pain was unbearable, but it was just beginning. After Emma left, I could barely bring myself to face anyone. My heart was shattered. My world turned upside down. I couldn't stop replaying every moment, every conversation, every interaction I had with her and with Ben, wondering how I missed all the signs. How had I been so blind? I tried calling Emma, but her messages were a blur of apologies, explanations, and pleas for forgiveness. She kept telling me how much she loved me and how she regretted what happened, but none of it mattered anymore. None of it could take away the sick feeling in my stomach. She had betrayed me, and worse, she had betrayed me with my own brother. I couldn't even look at her. I didn't want to hear her voice, but it didn't matter. The betrayal was already done, and no amount of pleading could undo it. I tried to reach out to Ben, but he avoided my calls. I was filled with a mixture of rage, disbelief, and an aching emptiness that felt like it could swallow me whole. It wasn't just about Emma anymore. It wasn't just about the love I had lost. It was about Ben, my brother, the one person who was supposed to have my back, the one person I thought I could trust above anyone else. And yet, he had done the unthinkable. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Ben. My hands shook as I dialed his number, but I knew I had to do it. I needed answers. I needed to hear him admit what he had done, to confront him with the truth. When Ben picked up the phone, I could barely speak at first. All I could hear was the sound of my heart pounding in my chest. I knew he had to know how much I hated him in that moment, but I was still trying to hold it together. My voice cracked when I finally managed to speak. "Ben, why?" I asked. "Why would you do this to me? Why would you do this to us?" For a moment, there was only silence on the other end of the line. Then he spoke, his voice low, almost defensive. "It wasn't like that, James," he said, his words filled with the kind of casual indifference that made my blood boil. "It wasn't a big deal. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was just, I don't know. She was there and I was there and—" "No," I cut him off. "You don't get to make excuses for this, Ben. You betrayed me. You slept with my fiancé. How could you? You knew how much she meant to me." Ben's response was exactly what I expected: defensiveness and denial. He tried to justify his actions, claiming that I wasn't the kind of man Emma needed, that I was too busy and too serious. He said she needed someone who would give her the attention and affection I couldn't. It was the same thing he had been telling her all along, the same poison he had been feeding her to turn her against me. I felt a surge of rage, but also a profound sense of grief. How could he say those things? How could he destroy the bond we had shared for so many years? And then, as if it wasn't enough, he tried to flip it on me. He told me that if I had just been a better fiancé, maybe this wouldn't have happened. He implied that I was somehow responsible for his betrayal. The nerve, the audacity. I could feel my fists clenching, my entire body shaking with anger. "You're unbelievable," I spat. "You really think I'm the problem here? You're the one who slept with her, not me. I've spent my whole life working to prove myself to this family, and you do this." I don't remember much of the conversation after that. I know I told him that he wasn't my brother anymore, that he had died the moment he slept with Emma. My words were harsh, but they felt right. At that moment, I realized that I was never going to get the brother I had wanted back. He was gone, and what was left was a stranger who had no remorse, no real understanding of the pain he had caused. I didn't speak to him after that. He tried calling me a few times, but I ignored every call. There was nothing left to say. But the real kicker, the thing that cut the deepest, was how my parents responded. My mom called me the day after I found out. She told me that Ben had been through a lot and that I needed to forgive him. She kept saying that family was everything, that I needed to put this behind me for the sake of the family. "James," she said, her voice trembling, "you can't just throw everything away over a mistake. Ben is your brother. He's always been there for you." A mistake? She called it a mistake? My father, as usual, was less emotional. He simply asked, "Why are you making this so difficult? You're going to push everyone away if you don't forgive him. You can't hold this against him forever." I couldn't believe it. I was in pain. I was crushed. And they were asking me to forgive Ben, to just let it go as if nothing had happened? I couldn't. I couldn't even fathom the idea of pretending like it didn't matter. But my parents? They didn't care. They only cared about keeping the family together, about protecting Ben, the golden child. I was sick of it. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep up the facade that everything was fine, that I was part of this family that had always made me feel worthless. I couldn't stay in a place where I was treated as less than. So I did the only thing I could do. I left. I packed my bags, told my parents I needed time away, and walked out. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was realizing that my family would never be what I wanted them to be. That, no matter how hard I tried, I would never be the son they wanted. No matter how much I gave, I was always second best to Ben. And now, as I sat in my new apartment, alone and broken, I had to face the hardest truth of all. My family, my brother, and Emma, they were gone. And in their place, there was nothing but a gaping hole of betrayal and loss. I thought leaving would help me. I thought that distancing myself from everything and everyone would somehow make the pain easier to bear. But it didn't. It didn't make anything better. It only forced me to confront the brutal reality of my situation. I was alone, not just physically, but emotionally. The people I had trusted the most, the people I had always believed would have my back no matter what, had turned their backs on me, and I was left standing in the wreckage of my life, trying to figure out where to go from here. I moved into a new apartment in a different part of the city, away from the memories of Emma, Ben, and my family. The new place was small, but it was mine. I furnished it simply, not wanting to overdo it, not wanting to get too attached. I spent my days at work, going through the motions, trying to bury myself in my responsibilities. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to block out the thoughts of what had happened. It didn't work. I couldn't escape it. The memories of Emma, of our plans, of the life I had thought we would build together haunted me. I couldn't shake the image of her sitting across from me, tears in her eyes, telling me that she had been with Ben. I couldn't stop hearing Ben's voice, the casual way he had justified his betrayal, as if it was no big deal. The more I thought about it, the more I felt a sense of nausea in the pit of my stomach. But what hurt the most was the realization that I had never mattered to them. Not really. Emma had said she loved me, and for a while, I believed it. But how could someone who truly loved you do that? How could someone betray you with your own brother, the person you trusted the most? I couldn't understand it. It made no sense. And yet, it happened. The phone calls from my parents didn't stop. My mother kept calling, leaving voicemails asking me to come home, to talk, to forgive Ben. She told me that family is everything, and that I needed to put the past behind me. My father didn't say much. He never did, but I knew his thoughts, his disappointment in me, his silence that spoke louder than words ever could. I couldn't bring myself to pick up the phone. Every time I heard the ringing, I felt a knot form in my chest. I had been so desperate for their approval my entire life, and now I couldn't even stomach the idea of talking to them. I wasn't the son they wanted, the son they always praised. They had made it clear that I would never measure up to Ben. I was always second best. I couldn't live in that toxic environment anymore. Then, Ben reached out to me. It had been a week since I had cut ties with everyone, and I had started to think maybe, just maybe, I could move on. But when I saw his name pop up on my phone, I felt the anger surge through me. I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to hear his excuses, but I knew I had to. I needed closure. I needed him to explain to my face why he did this to me, why he thought this was all okay. I picked up the phone, my hand shaking. "James," he started, his voice calm, too calm. "I know you're angry. I get it. But you have to understand, I never meant for it to hurt you. It was a mistake. We were both lost, and it just happened. I wasn't trying to hurt you." My stomach twisted. A mistake. That's how he saw it. A mistake. No remorse. No understanding of the depth of his betrayal. "You really don't get it, do you?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It wasn't just some mistake. You slept with my fiancé?" "My fiancé? Ben, how can you sit there and act like it doesn't matter? You don't even get how much you've ruined." There was silence on the other end for a moment. I could almost feel him trying to process my words. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said again. I was there for her when you weren't. You were so busy with your job, so focused on your future, and I was there. She needed someone." It took everything in me not to scream. "She needed someone?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You were the one who took advantage of her vulnerability, Ben. You were the one who preyed on her insecurities. Don't try to make this about me being too busy or too focused. This was about you and her, making a choice you knew would destroy me." I could hear him sigh. "James, I know you're hurt, but it's over. She's pregnant now. It's done. We can't go back. You have to let it go." Let it go? He thought I could just let it go? I hung up before I could say anything more. The weight of the conversation hit me all at once. My brother, the one I had always tried to connect with, tried to build a relationship with, had never understood me. He never truly cared. And Emma? She had just been a part of the betrayal, a piece in the puzzle that made everything fall apart. I blocked Ben's number, ignoring the dozens of missed calls and texts he sent in the following days. I didn't want to hear his excuses. I didn't want to hear him tell me how sorry he was, how much he regretted everything, because it wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't undo the damage. I had been living in denial for so long, trying to keep the peace, trying to hold onto a family that was never really there for me. But now, I couldn't deny it anymore. The family I had fought so hard to please, the family I had tried to keep close, was nothing but a source of pain and disappointment. They had chosen Ben. They had chosen him over me, and I could never go back to that. I began to wonder if I was wrong, if I was being too harsh, too unforgiving. But then, I remembered everything that had happened, the way they had treated me, the way they had dismissed my feelings, my achievements, and I realized that I was right. I was justified. I didn't owe them forgiveness. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I was done. I was done with the lies, done with the manipulation, done with the betrayal. It was time to start over. After I cut off all contact with Ben, the weight of the situation didn't lighten. If anything, it felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. Every part of my life had become a mess, a life I had worked so hard to build, only to watch it crumble in the blink of an eye. No matter how many days I spent trying to move on, it was impossible to escape the truth. My family was broken, and the foundation I had built everything on was gone. Even though I physically removed myself from the chaos, I couldn't escape it in my mind. The constant thoughts, the hurtful memories, the anger, it all flooded back when I least expected it. I had put up walls, distancing myself from everything that hurt, but those walls weren't enough. They couldn't protect me from the betrayal that kept coming at me from all sides. I kept seeing Ben's smug face, hearing his words echo in my head, and Emma, her tear-filled eyes and desperate pleas for forgiveness, only fueled the fire that burned in my chest. I had decided to move forward. I had to, but even as I tried to rebuild my life, the situation continued to haunt me. My job was the only place I could escape to, a place where I could put my focus on something other than the mess at home. But even then, I couldn't shut it out. Word had gotten around about what had happened, and it wasn't long before I noticed people at work looking at me differently. I could feel their eyes on me, the whispers behind my back. It felt like there was no safe space anymore, no place where I wasn't reminded of the disaster that had become my life. The phone calls from my parents didn't stop either. My mom still tried to guilt trip me, sending me texts asking when I would come to my senses and bring the family back together. Every single time, I blocked her number. I couldn't deal with it anymore. The guilt they were trying to push onto me felt like a weight I couldn't bear. My dad, on the other hand, had gone silent. He never called, never sent a message. But the silence spoke volumes. I knew where his loyalties lay. He would always choose Ben. It wasn't even a question anymore. Then one day, something happened that pushed me to my breaking point. I had just come home from work, exhausted, hoping for a quiet evening to myself. But as soon as I walked through the door, I saw a figure standing in my living room. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. My mother. She was standing there, looking around as if she belonged. She hadn't knocked, hadn't called. She was just there. "Mom?" I asked, my voice flat, trying to mask the surprise and anger bubbling inside me. She turned, a sad smile on her face, and wiped away a tear. "I know you're angry, James," she said, her voice quivering, "but we're family. You can't just shut us out like this. You have to forgive Ben. You have to understand that he made a mistake. He's your brother. He's been through a lot." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My chest tightened. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. I had to physically stop myself from shouting at her. Instead, I took a deep breath and spoke through gritted teeth. "Mom, you have no idea what he's done. You have no idea how much he's hurt me. This isn't about forgiveness. This is about respect. I can't just pretend like everything is okay when it's not. You have to stop making excuses for him. He destroyed everything. And you're asking me to forgive him? No, I can't do that." Her eyes filled with tears and she took a step toward me. "But James, family." "No," I cut her off. "Family doesn't do this. You've chosen him over me for years. Do you even realize that? You've always given him everything. You've always made excuses for him. I was never good enough for you. And now you're asking me to just move on, to forget what he did? I won't." My voice trembled with the rawness of it all. I wasn't holding back anymore. I had spent so many years swallowing my anger, hiding my pain, trying to please them, but not anymore. I wasn't going to let them treat me like I didn't matter. Not anymore. She took a step back, as if my words had physically struck her. I could see the hurt in her eyes, but it wasn't the same hurt I was feeling. It was a different kind of hurt. The kind that comes when you know your child is lost to you, when you realize that you can't fix what's been broken. I could have said more. I could have told her how much it hurt to see her defend Ben, to see her excuse his behavior. But I didn't. I couldn't bring myself to. It felt like nothing I said would ever make her understand. She didn't see it the way I did. She never would. "I'm sorry, James," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just don't know what else to do. I can't lose my son." And with that, she turned and walked out of my apartment, leaving me standing there, frozen, 1,000 emotions swirling inside me. I couldn't stop the tears from welling up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I wasn't going to let them break me. The next few days were a blur. My mom kept trying to call, but I ignored every message. Ben, of course, still tried to reach out, but I blocked his number once again. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle the pressure to forgive, to pretend like everything was okay, because it wasn't. I thought that maybe, just maybe, I could reconcile with my parents, that maybe I could rebuild some semblance of a relationship with them, but I realized that I couldn't. Not when they couldn't even see what Ben had done, not when they kept making excuses for him. I couldn't forgive them for that, and I didn't want to try anymore. I couldn't stay in the city. Every time I passed by a place where I used to go with Emma or Ben, it felt like a stab to my heart. I needed a fresh start. I needed to escape the memories. I began looking at job openings in other cities. I wasn't sure where I would go, but I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't stay in a place that constantly reminded me of betrayal. I had to leave everything behind. And so, I started making plans. My future was uncertain, but I couldn't be afraid anymore. I had already lost everything. The only thing left was to rebuild. The more I tried to live in that apartment, the more suffocating it became. The memories, the pain, they were trapped in every corner of that space. I couldn't escape it. It was as if I had built my whole life on quicksand, and everything I had ever believed in was now crumbling beneath me. The betrayal by Emma and Ben, my parents' refusal to see the truth, the endless cycle of guilt trips and manipulation, it was all too much. I needed a clean break. I needed to start over. Every time I thought about the future, I saw nothing but chaos. I had been stuck in this web of family expectations, my own insecurities, and constant disappointment. But I knew, deep down, that if I stayed, I would only keep spinning in the same endless circle of anger, heartbreak, and regret. The idea of leaving town had been in my mind for weeks, but the reality of it seemed so extreme. Could I really leave everything behind? My job, my friends, the few remaining connections I had? Could I truly cut ties with everything and everyone I knew? Then one night, after a particularly rough day of work, I came home to a voicemail from my mother. I had been ignoring her calls, but something in me cracked. I pressed play, my finger trembling as I listened to her voice. "James, please just come home. We miss you. We need you here. I know things have been tough, but family is everything. You can't just leave us. I can't lose you too." The words echoed in my mind, but they didn't feel real. How could she still think family was everything when she had chosen Ben over me? How could she expect me to just walk back into that mess, pretend like nothing had happened? How could she believe that I would just forgive everything? I felt anger rise within me. It was the same manipulation, the same pressure to fit into their mold of what a good son should be. I realized that it wasn't me who needed to forgive them. It was them who needed to understand that I was done being their punching bag. I wasn't going to let them gaslight me into thinking this was my fault. And in that moment, something clicked inside me. I wasn't going to let them keep me chained to a life that was slowly suffocating me. I wasn't going to let their toxic behavior define me anymore. It was time to move on. It was time to find peace. I started looking for jobs in other cities, places where I could start fresh, where I wouldn't be constantly reminded of everything I had lost. After some searching, I found a position in a company based in a city several hours away, far enough to escape the daily reminders, but not so far that I'd be completely disconnected from everything. I made the decision. I was going to take it. I packed up what little I had left, told my boss I was leaving, and made plans to relocate. The days leading up to my departure were strange. There were moments of excitement, of anticipation, but there were also moments of doubt, moments when I questioned if I was doing the right thing. I thought about my family, about the people I was leaving behind. My mind went back to the years of trying to earn their love, trying to prove I was worthy, but I realized none of that mattered anymore. They had made their choices, and I had to make mine. On my last night in town, I stood in the empty apartment, staring at the walls. The place had once felt like home, but now it was just a shell of what it used to be. I wasn't the same person who had walked in there months ago. I had changed. I had been forced to grow, to adapt, to survive. I knew that leaving was the only way I could start healing. I drove out of the city the next morning, my heart heavy but resolute. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over it. I wasn't running away from my problems. I was running toward a new chapter in my life, one that I could write on my own terms. The road ahead was uncertain, but as I drove further from the city, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. It was like I was shedding the weight of my past, 1 mile at a time. I didn't need my family's approval. I didn't need to live up to their expectations. I didn't need to carry their mistakes with me. All I needed was to find peace. And for the first time, I felt like that was within my reach. I woke up early the next morning, the sound of birds outside my new apartment window, a welcome change. The city felt different, fresh, vibrant, full of possibility. I had arrived in this new place just a few days ago, but already it felt like the first real step toward reclaiming my life. It was strange to think that just a few weeks ago, I had been in that suffocating apartment, drowning in betrayal and hurt, unsure of how to even breathe. Now, I was here, in this unfamiliar city, surrounded by new opportunities and, for the first time in a long while, a sense of freedom. There was no Ben here. There was no Emma. No parents trying to guilt-trip me into returning to a family that had never truly seen me for who I was. No reminders of the life I had lost. I spent the first few days settling in, unpacking the few belongings I had brought with me, getting to know the neighborhood, finding small cafes and bookstores that I could make my own. Every step was an attempt to carve out a space for myself, a space that wasn't tainted by the past. But as much as I tried to focus on the new, the memories still lingered. They crept into my thoughts when I least expected it. There were moments when I would catch myself thinking about Emma, about how we had made plans for the future, about how I had trusted her. There were moments when I thought about Ben, my brother, the person who had been my closest companion growing up. And then, the crushing weight of their betrayal would hit me all over again. I still hadn't heard from my parents, though I knew the calls were coming. I could feel the pressure building. My mom had sent a few texts, all of them asking me to forgive Ben, to let go of the past. It was always the same message, wrapped in a bow of guilt and expectations. But this time, it didn't shake me. I was starting to realize that I didn't owe them an explanation anymore. I didn't owe anyone anything. I sat down one evening with a notebook in front of me, something I had picked up as part of my plan to move forward. I started writing, not about the past, or the pain, or the betrayal, but about what I wanted for my future, about who I was now, and who I wanted to become. I realized I hadn't allowed myself the space to think about that before. I had been so consumed by everything else, by the expectations of my family, that I never asked myself what I wanted. The more I wrote, the more I realized how much I had changed. I wasn't the same person who had spent years chasing after his family's approval, the person who had begged for love and attention that was never truly given. I had finally come to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to get the kind of love I wanted from them, and I wasn't going to keep chasing it. I had lost so much. My relationship with Emma, my trust in Ben, the hope I once had for a happy family. But in losing all of that, I had found something much more valuable, myself. I had found a version of me that didn't need validation from anyone else, a person who could finally stand on his own 2 feet and make choices for his own happiness. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew there would still be moments of doubt. There would be days when the weight of the past would come rushing back, but I also knew that I had the strength to handle it now. I was building a new life, piece by piece, and I wasn't going to let anyone or anything take that from me. My new job was going well, and I was starting to meet people. It was different from what I had been used to back home, but it felt good. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something just for me. I wasn't living for the approval of others. I wasn't carrying the burden of my past mistakes or regrets. I was simply living. The hardest part was still accepting the idea that I might never have the family I wanted, the one I had always dreamed of. But even that started to lose its sting. I had to learn that family wasn't just about blood. It wasn't just about who shared your last name. Family was about who had your back, who loved you, who supported you without trying to change you. And so, I moved forward. With each passing day, I could feel myself letting go of the anger, the bitterness. The things that had once held me back no longer had power over me. I was free. I still thought about Emma and Ben from time to time. The pain wasn't gone, but it was starting to fade, becoming less of a constant presence in my life. I knew that one day I might be able to forgive them, but I also knew that I didn't need to. I didn't need their forgiveness or their approval to move on. I had learned to forgive myself, and that, in the end, was the most important thing of all.